Now let's take a look at domestic product. And this is one that has moved up in a lot of people's eyes following the win in the Tampa Derby. He's owned by Claravich Stables. Most of the time we see Seth Klarman's horses on the turf, but it is obviously a very big client of Chad Brown's. You get Tyler Gaffalione aboard, who, interestingly enough, I believe Chad Brown does not have a very good record using Tyler Gaffalione for some reason. I don't know, but you see 5 starts, 2 wins, and a second for $314,000 and change. And he had a first in the Tampa Derby, that extremely strangely run race, and then he had a second in the Holy Bull, which was another rather strange race. So this one's had an interesting path to the Kentucky Derby. And we look at the pedigree, and of course, all of us who followed the Derby last year will see Practical Joke, and immediately the red flag goes up. You remember Practical Move was the West Coast horse who was much ballyhooed, but the big thing was that he was by Practical Joke, and getting around 2 turns, particularly anything over a mile and a 16th, was going to be a big issue. And so it remains an issue with domestic product. You couple that with the fact that the two-turn races he's running, the pace was glacially slow in both. And it sort of makes, it kind of doesn't really flatter his closing kick, because he really didn't have to do a whole lot of running early. In his prior races, he had been a little keen and up near the lead, and that hadn't worked out terribly well. So this may be a tactic to just sort of keep him in the race, because certainly his pedigree doesn't scream 2 turns, and certainly doesn't scream a mile and a quarter. If you look at the dosage profile, you see, oddly enough, no brilliant speed influences and no stamina influences. So it is a 3, which by all likes would be acceptable for this race if we didn't know about Practical Joke and his problem with distances longer than like a mile and a 16th, which would probably be the tops. So yes, you can say Practical Move got a mile and an eighth last year, but let's remember he saved ground all the way around the track, and he wasn't facing much, and he was a very classy horse. I would have loved to have seen him in the Breeders' Cup Dirt or Turf Mile, either one. I think that was a wheelhouse distance for him. So this is a big question mark. Now you look at the Conduit Mare profile, and you do see a lot of stamina over speed, so that is encouraging to a degree. But the way this horse runs, or has run, I wonder about him at a real classic distance. I think he might be up against it a little bit. Now we look at Practical Joke, and we see, you can take a look at some of the winners here. Skelly, most notably, and Tejano Twist, but they're both sprinters, and of course Practical Move from last year. So it doesn't really reveal a whole lot, except the fact that it maybe reinforces our thought about Practical Move, that his more prominent horses are 1-turn or sprinter miler types. So we look at the dam, and we see that Domestic Product is the only black type one in the race, and Convertible Freeze was the other one who has raced a bit and got $100,000 after 12 starts. So not a whole lot to write home about. So Domestic Product probably the star in this group. So we look at the races, and we'll see that early on in Domestic Product's career at Saratoga and Belmont at the Big A for the maidens, it was a little more up near the pace, a little keener, actually got rank at times. But since moving to the, and that was kind of the case in the Remsen too, as I recall. But you see the last 2, they've taken this one back, and has rated behind slow paces, and has displayed a pretty good kick late, which makes perfect sense because the paces have been so slow in the last 2 races. I think looking at the Equibase figure of 82 for the Tampa Bay Derby, which was an extremely strangely run race, you got to have a lot of question marks about Domestic Product and his ability to get a mile and a quarter and to be competitive when okay, he's closing into a slow pace. That's true, but he wasn't facing much in either, and they were just kind of strangely run races, and so there's a lot of questions about him. So let's take a look at the Holy Bull and the Tampa Bay Derby, and maybe we'll get some answers there. So the Holy Bull Stakes was domestic products foray into stakes races for his 3-year-old campaign following not a very good effort in the Remsen. And, of course, this was a much ballyhooed race because it marked the return of Fierceness, the Breeders' Cup juvenile champion. And you see domestic product and the Claravich Silks right next to Fierceness.
And they're off in the 33rd running of the Holy Bull.
You see domestic product got away fine, but goes immediately to the rail to save ground behind Hades. And you got Fierceness who squeezed a little bit, not much, but a little bit, and had to take wide. So, and they got you can see there's a pretty good hold on domestic product right there. So he's still in that mode of being a little keen to get up on the lead, and look at the jockey really tugging, really grabbing him. And that isn't a big surprise because the pace was so slow. I mean, 25 is just walking at Gulfstream. Is anywhere really, but especially at Gulfstream.
He's racing in fourth, so no breather for Fierceness as he has a horse on his outside. Back from the inside, that's domestic product to race together with Otello.
50, that's just incredibly slow.
They make their way to the first finish line in the 2024 Holy Bull. And Hades
looks like domestic product settled down a little bit, but
starts to shift gears, and there he goes.
He's in gear.
Hades tries to counterpunch with the benefit of the inside, 4-wide C streak, inveigled, hanging tough from between.
Saving all the ground on the rail.
2 lengths back to domestic product and dropping back to last is Dancing Groom, just ahead of him Otello. Fierceness not out of second gear yet. They went 3/4 and Fierceness goes to the first finish line.
You see, he's got it going, and he's saving all the ground on the rail, and tips out. And he's looking pretty good here.
Fierceness is off the turn, but he's not home yet, as Hades is dead game and battling back. Off-cover domestic product.
You see, he's saved all that ground, and he wasn't asked for a whole lot, even though he was a little keen. So certainly he's got plenty of horse left. He closed out, into what we found to be a fairly mediocre field, but was a decent effort, and certainly better than he had produced in the Remsen. So something to build on. So now we got the Tampa Bay Derby, and this does bring back kind of a sour memory. As you see the note on the bottom, tote delay. We were not able to bet on this race, and it was a pretty big bummer because I had to try, and I know a lot of you did too. So, but anyway, so here we go, and
never do it. Got away to a good start. No more time is close up and driving.
You see, no more time. You see, domestic product a little keener than he had been before to be up amongst the leaders, and certainly that's going to prevent him from being quite as rank as he was before, but still pulling a little bit. You can see that he's still a little keen. And this this race just is a mystery to me. I have no idea why Good Money was asked to just walk it like this. I mean, this is just ridiculously slow for Tampa. And nobody went to, just to take over. I didn't quite understand it, but, no more time, was just content to sit right off his throat latch. I suppose that makes sense, being that slow. There's domestic product, and 51. I mean, Arctic.
And at the back is Give Me Liberty.
He's still, domestically, he's still pulling a little bit
here in the Tampa Bay Derby. Good Money leads him by the 3/8 pole.
And we'll get to that. I'll tell you why. I got a theory about it, given the way he's running. So now they're starting to get into it.
Domestic
You
product.
see
moving just in
116. I
behind
mean,
four,
my
2.5
God, it's
off
just
the
so
lead as
ridiculously
they come to the
slow.
top of the stretch.
So this
Good
race
money
is
and no
like
more
really
time.
hard to
These
figure
two
out
into
what
the
to
lane.
do with
Domestic
it.
product going to swing toward the 3 wide side. Grandmo the first, right to his outside. Final furlong time now. No more time. Pokes the nose in front. Good money tries to counter. Domestic product.
Domestic
Grandmo
product
the
could finally
first,
let
still
him
over the chance.
loose.
Flying is hardened up the rail. A wild
Look at
finish
all
here.
of them.
A Titanic
Everybody's
tussle in Tampa.
got a shot
It's
at this
anyone
one.
of 4 here. They drive the wire. No more time.
just
Domestic
happened to
product.
get up in
it's
time.
between no more time and domestic product. Grandmo the first.
Now let's look at the pace study here. And what we have are two races that were run extremely similarly, both with very slow first and second fractions and a big finish at the end. So from that perspective, they're a little hard to use as reference points, and it's really hard to gauge the horses to a degree that ran in the races because the paces were that slow. The Tampa Derby, the last time I remember a Derby prep being run like that was the Bluegrass Stakes in 2007. And it was 51, 116, and I forget what the final time was, but it was like 150 for a mile and 16th, something like that. And it was just Dominican won the race, but it was just so strangely run, and it was on synthetic back when Keeneland was synthetic. It was just a really weird race to figure out what to do with, and you kind of have that same situation here. Now we are helped with the fact that the horses that have come back from the Holy Bull, none of them have really done anything, with the exception, of course, of Fierceness in the Florida Derby. Hades in particular has proved mediocre, and any horse that was running in the Florida Derby, aside from Fierceness, really didn't turn out to be very much. So we know that. So looking at domestic products effort there, okay. You know, you look at it again and you just go, well, what did you really do? You rated behind a glacially slow pace, and if you really had something, you would have taken over the race at that point and just blown right by Hades, but you didn't. You ended up with almost a suck-up second. And so we look at the pace numbers. You got 51.89, which is just walking in the first fraction, and they did pick it up. You had a middle move at 55.53. Great, but, you know, still you had plenty left because the first fraction was so slow. But then you finish up with a 52.85, which isn't bad. But when you consider how slow the race was run, you'd like to think you'd have a little more in the tank than that. So then you go to the Tampa Derby, and it's kind of a distorted, an exaggerated view of the Holy Bull, because the opening fraction was 25 at Tampa, and again, domestic product with 51.27, so just walking. And then the second fraction didn't do any running at all either, 52.55 with a 116 6 furlongs. And of course, you know you're going to have fractions that slow. You're going to have tons in the tank left, and he ran a 57.17, which is just ridiculous. Well, is that scenario ever going to repeat itself in the Kentucky Derby? No way. Not now, not ever. So what you have is, particularly when you consider that domestic product is by practical joke, where anything over a mile is a bit of a challenge, the pace scenarios for both the Holy Bull and the Tampa Derby were extremely favorable to him because they were so slow. Of course, he would have something in the tank left. He has enough quality to finish second and win the Tampa Derby and get second in the Holy Bull. And if you look at the EP, AP, and SP, because of that huge third fraction, if you look at the average and sustained pace, and again, I've mentioned, horses who lead in both those categories win the Kentucky Derby usually. He's one of the leaders, but it's illusory because of the pace was so slow in both those races. So you couple that with his pedigree, and it's to me, the Kentucky Derby is going to be a really tall order to be effective in for domestic product, which leads to issues and concerns. Number one, of course, practical joke. Just doesn't get horses that can go 1.25 miles. So that's a really big concern. The second thing is, what happens when he gets into a race that's got legitimate pace? He hasn't run in 2 in a row. The last one he ran in that was a little quick, the Remsen, he was up the track. So anything between what he's running the Tampa Bay Derby and the Remsen, something that's honest or legitimate, let's say 47 and 111 for the Derby, I think that's going to eat him up. So I don't think that that's logical, that would work well for him. So what are you left with? To me, I think he's going to be a rabbit. I wouldn't be surprised at all. We know Chad Brown did that for Sierra Leone in the Bluegrass Stakes with Connor, with Top Connor, and he did it and maybe he used good money in the Tampa Bay Derby to slow things down to make it easier for domestic product. But in any event, what other role could domestic product have in the Derby? He's not going to get the distance. He's not going to have a favorable pace scenario. And likely, if he gets rank, like he has been in his last couple where they got a pull on him, that's going to eat him up too. So why not just let him go? Because he wants to anyway, and he doesn't really have a chance to win. So I think domestic product is going to be a rabbit for Sierra Leone. It makes perfect sense to me, and that's the extent of his participation in the Derby. I don't like him at all, and to me, he's a toss.